Hey there! Have you ever noticed your favorite restaurant suddenly tastes worse? Or maybe your favorite product just disappears without warning, and the prices keep going up even though you're buying the same things? Most people think these are random problems that happen for no reason. But many of these changes show up after something big happens behind the scenes. A private equity takeover. Wait, what's that? So in this video, we're going to break down what private equity really is, the debt trick, how it makes money, why it keeps buying everything, and why ordinary people often end up paying the price. Let's get started. Section 1. What private equity actually is. So what is private equity? Private equity is a type of investment firm that buys entire companies. After they buy a business, they usually take full control of how it is run. They decide how the company is run, what gets changed, and how to increase profits as fast as possible. If normal investors usually buy only a small percentage of a company through shares, private equity firms usually buy most or all of the company. And of course, buying a whole company needs a lot of money. That is why they use a mix of their own money and a large amount of borrowed money. So they buy a company, try to increase its profits quickly, and then sell it again after a few years. It is almost like flipping a house, except the house is an entire company with workers, stores, products, and customers. This is also why private equity is often seen as controversial, because their decisions can sometimes hurt workers and customers. There's also a major misconception here. Private equity is very different from hedge funds and venture capital. Hedge funds mostly trade stocks, just like investors and traders, but on a much larger and more aggressive scale. Venture capital invests in young startups, usually small, new companies they believe might grow in the future. Private equity, on the other hand, focuses on buying older, established companies that already have customers and steady cash flow. Some of the biggest private equity firms in the world are Blackstone, KKR, and Apollo. And yes, you have probably heard at least one of these names before. They control huge amounts of money and own many companies people use every day. Section 2. The debt trick. Now let's talk about how private equity actually buys companies. The trick they use is called a leveraged buyout, or LBO. It sounds fancy, but the idea is actually simple. Imagine a shoe company named Wee Wee Shoes worth $100 million, and a private equity firm wants to buy it. You might think they need to pay $100 million in cash. But no, they usually put in only a small amount of their own money, like maybe $20 million, and then borrow the remaining $80 million from banks or lenders. After buying the company, the magic happens. The private equity firm passes the entire debt onto the company they just bought. Wee Wee Shoes now starts its new life with a massive loan it never asked for. And once a company is loaded with debt, it often has no choice but to cut spending. It needs to save money fast. That usually means firing workers, raising the price of shoes, reducing quality by using cheaper materials, delaying upgrades, and stopping long-term improvements. All the changes that customers eventually notice and complain about. A famous real example is Toys R Us. Private equity firms bought the company using a similar debt-heavy structure. Toys R Us became buried in loans, and most of its income went to paying interest instead of running the business. The company could not keep up with competitors, could not invest in online shopping, and could not survive. It filed for bankruptcy in 2017 and shut down its stores in 2018. But the good news is they're making a comeback in 2024. That's good. Section 3. How private equity makes profit. Now, you might be wondering, how can a company that is buried in debt still make money for the private equity firm? The answer is that private equity usually wants to squeeze out as much money as possible, as fast as possible. Of course, not all private equity firms, but most of the pattern is like this. First, they fire workers. Cutting staff lowers the company's expenses right away. Even if sales stay the same, profit goes up because payroll costs go down. Second, they cut costs everywhere. They switch to cheaper ingredients, cheaper suppliers, fewer staff per shift, smaller portions, slower customer service, and less maintenance. This boosts short-term profit. Even if the quality drops, private equity usually focuses on quick profit, not long-term improvement. Third, they raise prices. This is the simplest way to increase revenue overnight. Customers pay more for the same product, even when the quality is worse. Fourth, they sell the land or buildings. For example, if WeWe Shoes owns one of its store buildings, private equity can sell that building for quick cash. But now, WeWe Shoes no longer owns the building and must pay rent to stay in that building. This move is called a sale-leaseback. Private equity can take the cash made from the sale while the company gets stuck with another long-term cost. Fifth, they push the company to take more loans. Remember, it is the company that takes the loan, not the private equity firm. And private equity earns fees from every new loan. So if WeWe Shoes takes a new $10 million loan, the private equity firm might take $1 million as a transaction fee, leaving the company with only $9 million, but still responsible for paying back the full $10 million plus interest. Sixth, they pay themselves special dividends. A dividend is basically a payout to the owner. Since private equity is the owner, they can create a special dividend for themselves. So the company pays money or dividends to the owner, which is the private equity. Finally, they flip the company. They try to sell the business for more than they paid. If they succeed, they earn a huge final profit. And if the company collapses before they can sell it, they already collected fees, loans, and dividends, so they still walk away with money. This playbook explains why many companies weaken or fail after private equity takes over. A good example is Red Lobster, where aggressive cost-cutting and sale-leaseback deals put huge pressure on the business. Another example is Marsh Supermarkets, which collapsed after heavy debt and also sale-leaseback. And as we mentioned earlier, Toys R Us was unable to survive because its debt load was too heavy. Some companies like Red Lobster and Toys R Us fortunately made a comeback, but some did not. Section 4. Who gets hurt and who gets richer? Now, let's talk about the part that most people actually feel in their daily lives. Workers are usually the first to feel the pain. When a company starts firing people to cut costs, jobs disappear. The remaining workers become overworked, stressed, and underpaid. Service gets slower, lines get longer, and mistakes happen more often because fewer people are doing more work. Local stores also shut down. If a company closes weaker branches to save money, some communities lose their only nearby grocery store, pharmacy, or restaurant. This can create what is known as a food desert, where people have to travel far just to buy basic things like fresh food. And don't forget that prices go up too. After private equity raises prices to increase profits, customers pay more for lower quality. The company is focused on paying off debt instead of improving anything. And of course, when the loan payments become too large, the business cannot keep up and ends up bankrupt. In healthcare, the impact is even more serious. If private equity takes over hospitals, nursing homes, or emergency clinics, cutting costs can mean fewer nurses, fewer safety checks, and slower response times. And in healthcare, small mistakes can cause real harm. Tenants also get squeezed when private equity buys housing. Rent goes up, maintenance gets worse, and buildings deteriorate. Tenants pay more for less because the new owner is trying to extract money as fast as possible. All of this happens while private equity still walks away with profit. As I mentioned before, they take fees, special dividends, and cash from selling company assets early. And if the company finally collapses from the debt, they already made their money long before the failure. This is why the private equity model is so controversial. Section 5. Why private equity keeps getting bigger. At this point, you might think, if so many companies collapse after private equity takes over, then how does private equity keep growing? Well, for many years, interest rates were very low, especially in the US. When interest rates are low, borrowing money is cheap. This makes private equity able to borrow billions at a low cost, buy more companies, and repeat the cycle over and over again. Another reason is that huge investors like pension funds and universities invest billions into private equity funds. These institutions want higher returns, so they give their money to private equity firms to grow it. This gives private equity a huge supply of cash to go out and buy more companies. Struggling companies are also easy targets. When a company is already weak or losing money, these companies are desperate for cash, so they accept deals they normally would avoid. This makes it easier for private equity to take control. Less competition in many industries also helps private equity grow. For example, if a private equity firm buys multiple shoe companies, it becomes easier to influence prices and cut costs, because in the end, customers have fewer choices. Many brands might look different on the outside, but behind the scenes, they are owned by the same private equity group. And in the last decade, private equity has moved into basic needs like housing, hospitals, food, and childcare. These industries are very stable because people need them no matter what happens in the economy, which makes the business even more profitable. And also, the rules around private equity are limited and move slowly. By the time new rules are discussed or created, private equity has already moved into new industries or found new strategies. This allows them to stay ahead and continue expanding. So, in conclusion, private equity buys companies using huge amounts of debt. They cut costs to make money fast, and they extract as much profit as they can through fees, new loans, and special dividends. And even if the company collapses from the pressure, they already took their money long before the failure. Once you understand how the system works, it becomes easier to see the patterns behind rising prices, shrinking quality, and why so many familiar brands suddenly disappear. Help us keep making videos like this by becoming a member and unlocking some exclusive perks too. If you want me to make other videos explaining these topics, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.